Hello my lovely Misfitians, and welcome back to another video. Now, if this is your first video, you might be a little bit confused, but we are currently in a series where we are working through one particular painting. And this is actually the third video of that series. So if you want to check out the first two videos where basically I teach you how to set up your workspace in the first video, and then the second video is how to paint this background that you're seeing here. If you want to check those out, I will provide a playlist for you in the link down below, as well as in that little icon in the corner. So you can check those out first and then jump into this step, which today we're going to be painting the foreground of this painting as well as those simple little mountains in the background. So for the previous video, the main color that we used was Payne's Gray, but for this particular step, we are going to be using Payne's Gray as well as Horizon Blue and also neutral tint. So the very first step that we're going to do is mix up our foreground color, and that is going to be a mixture of Horizon Blue plus Payne's Gray. And then we're going to add water to it until we get more of a milky consistency on our mixing palette. This is the color that we're going to use for our foreground snowy scene, or basically that hill that's in the very front. Once again, if you are a little bit confused about the consistencies of what I'm mixing on the palette, I actually have a full course on this, so I'll link that down below. But I have 5 kind of basic consistencies that I use for watercolor that kind of help guide you and help you understand what I'm actually mixing with my paint, that water to paint consistency. So just to let you know if you're a little bit confused by that. And what we're going to do next is just fill that front area in that hill with a nice flat wash. And I started by using my round 12 brush, but then switched to a flat brush that is 1 inch. And once you have that nice watery kind of flat wash over that whole hill, the next thing that you're going to be doing is with a round brush, I'm going to be using my size 12 again. You want to pick up some paint from your palette, kind of load that brush up, and then dab in areas where you would want shadows. So I'm not really painting a stroke. Since this paper is already wet, I'm going to use that to my advantage and just dab excess paint in areas where I would want shadows to be located. And what's going to happen is, since my paper is wet, I'm going to get these nice smooth gradients. And then if you feel like maybe there's too much of a dark color, I felt like on the edge of the hill, my paint kind of gradiated out a little bit too far. So what I can do is just simply add water, and that's what you're going to see me doing with my flat brush. So in the areas that I want to lighten up, I just add a little soft brush stroke of water. You don't want to add a lot since this is already wet and wet. You just want to add a little tiny bit, and it will actually lighten up that area. And then with a small brush, I believe it was a size 4, I then just touched up a couple of areas that I felt like needed to have smoother edges. So I just did some touch-ups with a smaller brush. And now that that is done, the next thing that we're going to be doing is painting our little mountains in the background. So what you're going to do is actually take the color that we just mixed up, and we're going to add a little bit of neutral tint. So a lot of you have been asking me, how do I keep my colors harmonious? Like, how do I pick out colors for a painting? Well, a simplified answer to that is I basically mix all my colors together, but I use very few. So with this, I've been using, you've noticed the Payne's gray. Well, to make sure that that hill in the front is a little bit lighter, but also matches my sky, I am adding a little bit of my Payne's gray to that front hill. And now to make sure that my mountains match my background as well as my foreground, I'm next going to be adding some neutral tint to the color that I've already mixed up. So basically, by mixing the colors together, I'm creating harmonious colors. So I hope that kind of makes sense, but basically I'm using a base color and then using it over and over and over again in every single section to create harmonious composition in this painting. Now, I do want to say neutral tint is a very intense and strong color, so you do not need a lot. So make sure that you're not pulling a lot of paint and putting it into your mixture. You just want a little tiny bit on your brush and you will be amazed at how quickly this stuff will tint and change the color that you've already mixed up. And once you have mixed up that neutral tint with the color that we mixed before, you're going to be adding this to your back mountains. Now, I can't paint this side mountain that you're seeing kind of on the edge of that left. You're going to notice I can't paint it. And that is because my paper is still very wet from the hill. So if I put paint there right now, it's going to bleed into the hill that we just painted. So what I'm going to do instead is mix up my next color, which I'm going to add a little bit of cobalt turquoise to the mixture that I've already mixed up on this page once again. And that is going to be our lighter color for the front mountains. Now notice this time I am not mixing the entire area because I still need a little bit of that darker gray for that last mountain. So I'm just going to mix a little bit of the edge of color that's on my palette with that cobalt turquoise. And then I'm going to hit everything with a heat gun to make sure that it is thoroughly dry. The main thing that I find with myself when I am painting a painting is I don't wait for things to dry thoroughly, and then my colors mix together and I lose those sharp, nice contrasting lines. So you want to make sure that you are thoroughly drying everything that you're painting before going on to the next step. And now that your paper is thoroughly dry, we're going to paint those front mountains. So what you're going to do is first take that cobalt turquoise color, and I recommend laying down a nice flat wash on that front right mountain. And once you get done with that, we can't really touch that second mountain once again because there is wet paint nearby. So we're going to allow that one to dry, and then we're going to paint the last mountain that's in the back with our gray tone that we mixed up earlier. Then I recommend hitting both of those with a heat gun, and once they are thoroughly dry, go ahead and add your cobalt turquoise mixture to the next front two mountains. And after you have laid those colors down, make sure once again that you dry everything thoroughly. And then we're going to mix up, I don't show it here, but you're going to mix up a very, very light version of neutral tint mixed with that color that we had before, that gray, Payne's gray, horizon blue color. We're going to add a little bit more neutral tint to that and then paint the shadows on our mountains. Once you have those shadows painted, go ahead and make sure you hit, once again, all of those mountains with a heat gun or a blow dryer. You want to make sure that is completely dry before we do the next step. So for the next step, it's going to be a little bit hard to see, but this is my own personal preference. You can leave actually the mountains the way they are now, but I like having a little bit of a shadow underneath those snow caps. So what I did is I just took the same color that I painted with the mountains, so that neutral horizon Payne's gray blue that we mixed earlier for those back mountains. I took that color again. It's very watered down, and then I added that to the edge of my snow caps, the very bottom, and then added a little bit of water to kind of gradiate it out or soften the edge. And what that is going to do is create this kind of smooth gradient shadow right underneath my snow cap. And I did the same thing with the front mountains, but that time I used the turquoise mixture that we used earlier to lay that first wash. And I basically just painted that underneath and then added some water to kind of gradiate it out and soften that edge once again. Now, the reason why this works is because, once again, watercolor is transparent. So since I'm layering another layer of pigment on top of my previous color, it's going to appear a little bit darker. Once you have painted the shadows underneath those snow caps to your liking, then go ahead and once again hit this whole thing with a heat gun. And to make the edges of those snow caps even more sharp, I always like to add graphite pencil to my illustrations. I think it just adds a little bit of extra texture or element to them. So what I did is I lined the bottom edge of my snow caps with just a simple graphite pencil. I use a very hard graphite pencil. Mine is the hardest graphite that you can purchase. I'll link that down below if you are interested in that. But that particular graphite, it's so hard that it creates a very sharp line, which is what I really like in my particular paintings. So what I did is I just edged the bottom of the snow caps to help make that line even sharper. And then once I was done with that, I took my Copic ink, white ink, and with a very, very small round brush, I just added tiny little dots underneath my snow caps just to add a bit more texture and interest to these mountains, just like so. If you don't want to use Copic ink, the one that I use is very expensive, to be perfectly honest, but the reason why I like it is, first off, it is very thick and it stays where it's supposed to, but at the same time, it's very smooth and it lasts for a long time. So in my opinion, it's worth the investment. But if you can't afford this, don't worry about it. You can actually use acrylic white paint. That will give you kind of the same effect. You just have to make sure you water it down to more of an inky consistency. And you have to kind of be careful how you use it, because if you add too much water, the dots will spread out and create really weird textures. So you have to play around with that. Don't just immediately add your acrylic white paint to your painting. You first really want to test it out on paper, but you can use acrylic white paint for this step as well. And we are almost done with the foreground. We've definitely finished our mountains. Our mountains are done, but now we have to finish that foreground. So the next step that you're going to be doing is taking, I personally really like that dark mountain, that background dark mountain color. So what I'm going to do is actually take that color and then water it down a little bit more and add that to our second hill as a nice smooth flat wash. And then by now you probably know the drill. Once again, hit that mountain with a heat gun and make sure it is thoroughly dry once again. Then you're going to paint those two front trees with a watered down Payne's gray. So we're going back to our first color. And what you're going to want to do is do your first tree and then make sure you hit it with a heat gun once again. And then you're going to do your second tree. And they should appear very similar in color tone. After you have dried both of them, then we're going to add another layer on top. We're going to glaze on top of that back tree with the exact same color. And what's going to happen is, since we are glazing on top of that previously painted color, it's going to appear darker, but actually I'm only using the same color. And finally, we are on to our last step for the foreground. So in this step, you're definitely going to want to remove all of the masking fluid. We're going to be prepping for the next video, which is the deer and the stars. once you have all of your masking fluid completely removed, the next thing that you're going to do is just take a very, very, very light wash of, basically I use the mountain color, that turquoise mixture color, and I basically just tinted the paper with this color. You can't even really see it on camera, but I personally don't like having a stark white color on my paper unless that area is supposed to be white, such as like white snow. That's a true highlight, would be white. So I left my mountain caps white. However, I feel like if you had more of a white kind of tree, like a birch tree, it would still have a tinted tone to it in a woods, especially if it's underneath tree foliage. So I always like to tint my trees. Then I hit everything once again with a heat gun, and that is it for this video. So now we have our background done, we have our foreground done, as well as our simple little mountains. The last step that we need to do is paint our deer and then paint those golden stars in the background. So that will be something to look forward to in the next video. I really hope you enjoyed this and you are enjoying this series. If you are, please make sure to hit that like button. It really does help, as well as subscribe if you are new here. If you are interested in any other courses that I have, please make sure to check out the link down below. And as always, y'all, happy painting and lots of love. I'll see you in the next video.